Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 316 of CryptoBiography, and I'm just calling it Looking Back because I do not have a story to read this week. So let's start off with that, actually. Let's go ahead and start off with that. It's been a whole thing, actually. So I finished up the story last week, and obviously a lot of my focus was on that. But in the back of my head, I was like, we really, we spent, it was 22 parter, so it was almost half a year. And towards the end, I was thinking, I'm getting towards the end of this story, and I don't really know what I want to write about next. So I wanted to start thinking about that, but I never really came up with anything. And then, of course, the last week I really was trying to focus on getting the end of the story right. And so I really didn't think about the next one. But then this last week happened. So I did several writing sessions and just got nothing done. It was crazy. Like, I was actually writing like just gibberish on the screen just to move my fingers around. It was bad. You know how it is. So, I mean, anyone who's tried to write has had times like that. So basically, I need an idea, and unfortunately, I did not come up with one. I even tried again, like last night and the night before, like trying to get, even though that's kind of too late in the week to getting going enough to actually get enough written for the episode. But anyway, I don't know what I'm gonna do exactly. We will come up with an idea, though. We will find something to write for next week, I'm sure. That is how this works. You sit down, you just try your ass off, and eventually something comes to you and you start writing. At least that's how it has worked for me. It did not help that I've actually been sick for over a week now, actually. It was before the end of the last episode. I was starting to feel bad. It's kind of a weird bug, too. It's not like a regular cold or anything, but it's kind of this weird draining thing where, like, most of the time I'm okay, and then, like, sort of in the afternoons, if I'm not like just completely resting, I just start feeling like crud. So I don't know. And that's like the only real symptom. So I'm not sure if it's a flu, cold, what it is. But anyway, it feels not so much fun to have, and hoping that it will go away soon. So in some ways, though, that symptom is not too unusual for me. A lot of times when I get a cold or a flu or something, I do sort of get this just sort of general body blahness, and I think other people sometimes do too. But for me, it's like it tends to be a very common symptom. It tends to be like the main symptom in a lot of cases, but rarely is it the only symptom. Because I don't have any like sneezing, sniffling, fevers, as far as I know. Although I haven't really tested for it, but I don't feel feverish, and I don't think I am. Anyway, I don't know what's going on with that. I don't think it helped me write or not write in this case, but I don't think it's the only reason I didn't get the story done for this week. But in any case, so I'm pretty happy with how things are going with CryptoBiography. I hope you're enjoying listening to the stories. I'm actually really proud of The Brick Wall. It's probably my favorite story, I think, that I've written. In many ways, it's sort of an unusual story for me too. If you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, then you know that I tend towards doing either sometimes they're actual fantasy stories, or if they're set in the real, quote unquote, real world, it's sort of magical realism is very common for me. A lot of sort of Twilight Zone-y stuff, which I guess is technically magical realism as well, but I don't know if people would consider it that. It's sort of the same idea, though, where it's like reality except, one magical or weird thing that is happening, that sort of thing. Anyway, so I've gotten pretty much all my stories. I don't think there's a single one that's not been either magical realism or just straight up fantasy. And this one, The Brick Wall is just straight set in reality. I wasn't even trying to like hint at anything, magical going on in the background or anything. It was just historical fiction set in 1900, and it was actually a lot of fun to write for a bunch of reasons. I mean, I've never boxed, but I mean, I did go through karate, and I know, a little bit about what it's like to spar and to, not so much to fight, but to spar and to, be in a situation that can be, physically dangerous or demanding. And also I did definitely go through a phase years ago where I was really into boxing. I still think it's a very interesting sport. It's a very brutal sport, but it's also a very delicate sport. I mean, there's a reason, the sweet science is a weird nickname for it, but it's also pretty apt because it is surprisingly involved. You think it's just two guys, outsiders, you would just think it's just two guys getting as strong as they can, blocking as much as they can and punching as hard as they can. And that's really just the very bare bones of it. And then after that, it's how do you keep your energy levels up? How do you slip punches by just the smallest amount so that you can maintain your balance and counterpunch and blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on. It was also interesting doing a little bit of research to learn about 1900. I did some research for 1900 to find out what the prices should be for certain items, and things like that. Did a lot of boxing research for the story as well. That was actually kind of fun to learn about too, because I learned that although it was not really a bare knuckles era, it was, the gloves were starting to come into play. So I had him, always using gloves. They would have been really relatively light gloves by modern standards, but I didn't really bother including that as a detail that got added, because there wasn't really a point to it. It was before mouth guards. They did not use mouth guards in 1900. They didn't start using mouth guards until the 1920s, actually. So that was interesting. Also, figuring out how big the purses should be and stuff like that was a lot of fun. And figuring out what sort of style, because the style was in flux too. You see the really old boxing pictures, with the guys holding their fists way out in front of them and stuff like that. And there was a reason for it. Turns out there was a reason for that. You see those old boxing styles where they're holding their hands way out and kind of low, they're not really holding them up even to their chin. And this is sort of that was really more the bare knuckles era. And what was happening with that style was, because it was bare knuckles, if you hit someone in the face, the bones are there, and you're just as likely to hurt your hand as you are to actually hurt their face. So they didn't do a lot of head punching, very little, in fact. In fact, it was mostly to the body, and that's why they held their hands way out to sort of give themselves some distance, and also much lower, because they didn't need to protect their head. Because, if you tried to punch someone in the face, and then they drop their head and you hit them in the forehead, which is one of the hardest bones in the body and one of the hardest places to hit, you just instantly break your hand. No question about it, you just break your hand. But once the gloves came in, then the style had to change, and that took people a while for people to sort of realize, now that we've got gloves, it's actually protecting our hands as much as it is, the other guy. In fact, you can certainly argue that actually it's more about protecting the boxer's hands than it is about protecting the other guy, because that's just kind of how it is. You'll just break your hand if you bare knuckle box and you hit people in the face all day. You pretty soon you're going to break your hands. And so that was interesting. So seeing what it would be like, but he didn't have the mouth guard, so he ended up losing a tooth. And it's just a lot of fun to read and write about. I had a lot of fun. I kind of knew about halfway through that they were going to end up in San Francisco, and because of that, and because I knew I had already sent it in 1900, I hadn't thought about this at the beginning of the story, but by the middle of the story, I knew they'd end up in San Francisco, and that therefore they would be there for the San Francisco earthquake. So I decided to kind of include that in the story, after a few years had passed, and and they'd sort of gotten settled in, and then of course everything got upended. But for the San Francisco earthquake, and that could have been written a million different ways, where like maybe one or the other of them died or their kids got hurt or whatever. But I decided not to go that way. Yeah, and I really like the characters too. I thought Lydia was interesting. Has a little bit of a like she's in some ways pretty pretty standard old style, where she likes sewing and clearly enjoys being a mother and blah blah blah. But she's also has this sort of Spitfire aspect to her and a little bit of backbone and wants to and definitely wants a hand in helping out their little growing family. And and Carson was interesting too. He's sort of at the cusp of adulthood when his family dies, and so he's kind of set adrift, doesn't really know what's going to happen or what what he's going to do with his life. And that's why he sort of backs into boxing. And I feel like it's both a reasonable thing to have happened to him, especially for a big guy who just who's near a gym and gets noticed by the gym owner and blah 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 blah. But also it's just as likely that he would then drift away from it as he did, where he gets a little time in it, realizes the parts of it that he doesn't like, and and decides to go in kind of a different way with his life, and realizes that this woman he's fallen in love with and married rather quickly, he is sort of like this has become the center of his life, and the boxing isn't really working for them, so they figure out something else. Anyway, I hope you liked it. I certainly enjoyed writing it a lot, and now I need to find out something else to enjoy writing. So so I've been we've got a bunch of stuff coming up. I've got some crazy scheduling things going on later this year. So we'll keep writing as much as we can, and then there's gonna be some weird weeks where I'll have to fill in with like compilations of previous stories and stuff like that. In any case, I hope you enjoyed The Brick Wall. I'm definitely keeping my eye out for what story to write next, and thank you for listening. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And and thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2023, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical. Oh, and since we're doing this sort of episode anyway, if you are listening, or if you're watching the YouTube version of this and wondering why I keep mentioning music, it's because I use music in the in the audio version. So I just do it all as one, and I don't re-record it for the audio version. Anyway, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening, and have a good one.